from TheMossShow.com. This is Hilton Gietzeno introducing episode 9 of The Moss Show. A couple of announcements before we jump into the episode. First up, the SharePoint conference coming up pretty soon. That's going to be October 19th to 22nd in Las Vegas. I won't be attending that myself, but if you haven't booked and you're keen to go, then definitely check it out. Obviously, a lot of SharePoint 2010 stuff coming around that time. There's some 15 sneak preview session listing up on the site as well. That's at mssharepointconference.com. So a lot of 2010 stuff coming, like customizing Office 2010 Backstage, what's new for developers, my sites and social networking in Office 2010. So that should be particularly interesting, especially after hearing tonight's show, SharePoint 2010 governance, and a bunch of other stuff as well. So go ahead and check that out, and obviously book soon if you can. I can't even give you a discount, unfortunately, through the podcast, but maybe next year we'll try and organize that with the team. With regards to the podcast and sponsorship, on that note, looking for sponsors for the podcast. So if you're keen to help out with things like help funding the hosting for the podcast and some other things as well, need some hardware and a better microphone, for example. So if you can help out, or if your company can help out, then drop me a line at feedback@TheMossShow.com, and that would be great. And we'll obviously give you some props on the show as well. In terms of upcoming episodes, we've got Joel Olsen coming up pretty soon. And that's another episode that I recorded at TechEd. But outside of that, we are hopefully going to have some interesting stuff coming up on security with SharePoint and on SharePoint and SQL Server and things like that. Lining up some guests everywhere from New Hampshire to New Zealand. So we'll see what comes out of those. With that, let's jump straight into the show. This is an episode that I recorded also at TechEd with Eric Harlan, who is giving some interesting talks around social networking and SharePoint. So let's jump into that episode and hear what Eric Harlan has to say.
I was proud and I was standing. I was lost in a crowd. But now this room is abandoned. Everybody keep on fading out. I was strong.
Okay, I'm sitting down here with Eric Harlan, who has come a very long distance to come and join us here at TechEd South Africa, down in my side of the world. So Eric, welcome. Nice to have you with us.
Appreciate it.
I know you've been touring a little bit, so I'm going to ask you in a short while to give us some intro to your time that you've spent here.
Okay.
Before we get into that, I'm going to just read your bio so people understand a little bit about who you are and what your background is, and we'll jump into talking about social networking and SharePoint. So in between searching the planet high and low for the best skiing conditions, best powder and crazy steeps, which I'm guessing relates to some sort of snow sport, you're not going to do too well in this country, Eric Harlan spends most of his time in the technology field. He's been in the IT industry for 10 years and heavily involved in SharePoint for the past 6. Starting from a developer role, Eric has moved to a more architectural role with a focus primarily around configuration and server implementation. Never forgetting his developer roots though, he still jumps in when needed to pick up the slack on custom dev projects, and as principal architect for Sogeti Baltimore, Eric is the first on the ground to plan and initiate SharePoint engagements and guide them to fruition. Eric's involved as well in many volunteer organizations, from the Maryland Elder Technology Outreach, SharePoint Saturdays, and educational code camps, to president and co-founder of the Baltimore SharePoint Users Group. Eric also does many speaking events revolving around TechEd, topics ranging from SharePoint development, InfoPath development, tricks and gotchas, and basic SharePoint sessions for the end user as well. Eric, you're a busy man, and it sounds like you tour the world a little bit as well.
I try to. Yeah, a little bit.
Welcome to this side of the world.
Thank you.
How have you enjoyed your time in South Africa? I know you've done the Kruger Park, the famous wildlife park.
It's been great. You know, we landed in Joburg after probably about 23 hours worth of travel. Hung out with Veronique Palmer for a bit, and then headed up to Pretoria. Is that how you say it?
Yeah.
Then a short stay there, and went to Kruger National Park, which was just outstanding. We were there for about 3 days. Saw all types of wildlife, everything you could possibly imagine except for the elusive leopard. We've yet to see the anchor point of the Big Five, which is a little bit sad, but at least gives me an opportunity to come back later and check it out some more.
So the other big five you saw, lions and
Lions,
rhino,
rhinos, and what else is there? Lions, rhinos, buffalo, elephant, and then again lacking the leopard. I'm not sure why they call it the big five and not the big six and include the hippo, but we saw those as well. So, and then we cruised down to the border of South Africa and Mozambique, Joel Olsen and myself, and literally walked across the border. Didn't really have any plans, no hotel, no anything, just about 24 hours worth of time to spend there. So we went across, checked out a few markets, and got to see that part of the country as well. Came back again, drove through Swaziland, checked out some traditional dancing, and stayed in some of the traditional style housing there. Had some great food in Swazi. It was really nice. And then 6-hour drive down to Durban. And then after Tech Ed, we go to Cape Town for a few days for a SharePoint Saturday there, back to Joburg, and back to the States.
Okay, so even in South Africa, busy man, hey?
Yeah.
Touring around. I think it's going to be a great SharePoint Saturday. You and Joel Olsen are going to be delivering a whole jam-packed day of all kind of sessions there. One of them's on social networking, but a bunch of other things as well. So this episode will probably come out after that, so I'm hoping whoever came along had a good time.
Sure.
The time shifting of editing. So thanks in retrospect for that today.
Absolutely.
It's coming up next week. Eric, we're talking about social networking. It's obviously a hot topic at the moment, and you've got some knowledge around that. I'm hoping you're going to share that with us. We're going to talk, obviously, in a SharePoint context, being the Moss Show, but I mean, social networking, there's a lot of other brands and other names that will jump to mind for a lot of people as well.
Sure.
And different kinds of sites, different kinds of media as well. I think tweeting, for me, was a rude word growing up, so it's weird to kind of use it in a business context. It's what you had when you had too much gas from a heavy meal. So we'll see what it means in a professional context. But maybe to kick off, do you want to give us some definition of what you mean by social networking? Make sure that everybody's got in their minds an idea of what we're going to be discussing.
Sure. Well, there's, I guess, many different levels of social networking. I myself don't take it to the extreme that a lot of other folks use. I actually just signed up for Facebook today. So believe it or not, I'm fairly new to the whole social networking idea. And
Eric, I'll be your friend on Facebook if you want.
Outstanding. But there's different aspects to it. There's within the context of SharePoint, there's blogging, there's wikis, there's discussion boards, my sites, things like that. My colleagues and things that kind of get rolled out with Moss 2007. But then there's underlying services that are kind of taking over or taking at least a good capture of the world, and there's Twitter and Facebook. More in the past, MySpace. I don't think many people actually use MySpace too much anymore, and LinkedIn as well. So we're going to talk a little bit about the different theories behind those social networking aspects, how they integrate with SharePoint, how they sometimes need to be separate, and go from there.
Okay, great. So let's jump into it. Do you want to tackle them in any particular order?
Well, I guess let's talk about the SharePoint side of things. Everyone knows blogs. Everyone knows kind of the concept. At least most people on this show will probably understand blogs. Basically, what it comes down to is more of a launching pad for ideas, for topics of conversation that's going to be whether used inside and internally of a corporation, or whether it's just personal blogging out on the web. A lot of the aspects that are used internally, maybe tracking a project or tracking progress about a specific engagement or something like that. But then you actually have wikis as well, which sometimes can get blurred between blogs and wikis. There's a little bit of a line that blurs there across the two, and wikis can be utilized more for free-flowing content between multiple people. If you need, maybe different geological locations where you don't have something like a live communication server set up, or you can't have free-flowing real-time conversation, maybe a wiki is a good thing to have internally of a corporation, whether it be SharePoint or whatever else. And then you have things like discussion boards, where you can set up. It might not necessarily be a real-time conversation, but it can be kind of a task that gets posted to someone's my site or something like that, or maybe something that someone's tracking specifically about a topic they're interested in. And again, this can happen all internally of a corporation, whether it be specific around that person's job, or it can be external if you have an external-facing SharePoint site or something along those lines. And then we kind of jump out of that. It doesn't necessarily revolve around SharePoint, but you have things like Twitter, where much of, at least from the perspective that I use it, is specifically around SharePoint. And there's many things we can get into with that. We can dive into some of the applications that are used and how things can be segmented and viewed in different ways. And for example, there's an app. Most applications out there now that sit on the user's client machine will allow you to set up columns or specific searchable areas that you want to be posted to your little dashboard there. So anytime someone does a search on something like SharePoint, it automatically gets shown in your dashboard, and you can follow the kind of conversations that happen around SharePoint anywhere in the world in real time. That actually comes in handy for multiple things, whether you're stuck on a client site and you need information quickly about a specific topic that you're not sure about, or you're just following some new releases, like 2010's coming up, and there's a lot of buzz and a lot of talk about 2010 as well. So there's a lot of different ways that you can use things like Twitter, and then we fall back into things like Facebook, where there's utilization and implementation to kind of interface those things together, LinkedIn, and those types of social networking services.
Okay, so I think part of it, from what I hear you saying, depends on the direction of the communication. So a blog, although you can have multiple authors on a blogging site, each post is only created by one person. Right. So that's kind of one way out, versus a lot of the other communication tends to be bi-directional. Twitter seems to fall more into their one way, but it's obviously much smaller messaging. Facilitates the conversation by kicking it off, I guess.
Right.
And there's a nice mix between some of the ideas that you could use in SharePoint directly and use outside of SharePoint. I think one of the things you mentioned to me as well before the conversation was that a lot of the definition that one has of social networking depends on what one uses it for.
Absolutely.
Do you want to elaborate on that?
Well, a mom of 4 people might use Facebook in a way that just ties her together with people that she went to school with X amount of years ago, while someone who like ourselves, who follow technology closely and kind of the new and upcoming functionality and features that are coming along with functionality or for software that we're interested in, that's a real live, ongoing, day-to-day, time-consuming thing to sink our ideas into, and consume other people's ideas back. So at any given time, any of these services, whether it be blogs and wikis internal of SharePoint, or something like Facebook or Twitter external of SharePoint, can at any given time be utilized more or less, or blur those lines between those services, or even overrun into other services based on how active the person is and what type of information they actually want to get back from that service. For instance, there are many times in Twitter where I get extremely frustrated because if I'm on a client site all day, for example, and I don't have access, like I know you said you don't have access during the day, but I want to know what's been said at 2 o'clock p.m. while I'm in the middle of working. And then I log on at night and go back through and see what types of conversations were being held. It frustrates me that there's no real, or at least done well, conversation threading in a way that lets you tie together what's been said in order, in context, throughout the day. So it's very easy to lose context based on, if you're not sitting in front of Twitter at that moment where those conversations are being thrown back and forth in 140 characters or less. So it's really hard to keep context of a conversation. And then with that, if you do get into a conversation that's valuable, and I find myself doing this fairly often, where you just have so much more. You've narrowed down who you want to talk to and what you want to talk about, but you can't say what you want to say in 140 characters. That's a time where you take it off to a different medium, whether it be Facebook, whether it be email. Traditional email that's been around for 40 years has its purpose in today's technology. It's been around for 40 years because it's utilized so well by so many people. And there's comes times where you have to take a conversation off of a social networking service to be able to follow more context and get more information out of that conversational transaction.
You're dealing now with multiple content sources. I mean, email, although it's been around and been very important for a lot of companies and a lot of people for a long time, there are a lot of organizations that struggle with the use of email. And you're talking about even more content sources now. When I mentioned that we were blocked, I think that what I was referring to there was specifically that my company blocks Facebook during working hours. So at 12 p.m., or so the afternoon, 12 p.m., it unlocks for an hour, and 5 p.m. it unlocks for the rest of the evening.
Okay.
But I think, clearly what the company's worried about is just the possibly the bandwidth. We are a little bit more restricted here, but it's mainly really the time. It's the productivity time.
Sure.
And I know we've mentioned that before, that's one of the concerns. Do you want to maybe chat more about that and maybe tell me more about some of the other concerns companies may have around using or opening up social networking capabilities to their users?
Well, the first thing I think that we need to talk about is anything that takes a employee's mind away from what they need to be doing at any particular time is a productivity, hog, basically. That can be many, many different things. That can be email, which traditionally is a huge issue. You spend many hours a day just checking email, and if you become more self-aware and train yourself to maybe only answer email, let's say at 11 p.m. or 11 a.m. during the workday, and then 4 p.m. during the workday, and no other time during your workday, you'll actually find that you get more done because the people who are trying to get a hold of you will use methods like a quick telephone call versus a long, drawn-out email conversation of a few lines or less, and then they actually will then become trained themselves as to when to contact you and for what important reasons to contact you with. Meetings, we've all been there. We've had days where there's back-to-back meetings all day long. You're not getting anything done that day. You're just talking about something you need to get done. And I think a lot is to be said for managing your own ability to keep yourself productive with things like Twitter or Facebook. So yeah, there's things that you need to be considered, whether it be bandwidth, whether it be productivity, and I'm not saying that a particular company has less of a reason to block it during the day. I think there's very valid points to be able to do that. I myself have to, specifically train myself to not use Twitter as much during the day, or I just don't get anything done. It's just the way it is. So with restricting access, a lot of it actually will come down to the method in which the company embraces it. So if they use it internally for, or when I say it could be any social networking medium, but when they use it for something specific to their job or something specific to the free flowing of information that needs to happen to get something done, I think any type of social networking medium can be useful. It just has to be embraced in a certain way and to uphold that standard so that it's not specifically abused or overused, or productivity gets lost because of it. The other part of it is actually companies that have proprietary information need to worry about their IP. There's information that they need to protect, whether it be financial information or company secrets, patents, those types of things that they need to consider not being exposed. Another thing, or another organization might be something like the military or the government, where top secret information is being talked about and distributed daily. There needs to be a certain amount of security and precaution taken into consideration so that if that information is not necessarily impossible to be let out, because we all know that's just not the case. There's always a way somehow to get information out of an environment, whether it be someone literally has a USB thumb drive they stick in a computer, or they're emailing it to people or whatever. But at least make it harder to make sure that information stays internal and in the eyes of the people that need to see it only.
So we've discussed some reasons why a company might be concerned or have concern around the use of some of these sites and technologies and products. Why might a company be interested in using them? Why would they actually encourage their use?
Well, I think at least a great example would be, let's say, a consulting firm who specializes specifically, or one of their specific tracks is SharePoint. Maybe they have a TAP organization internally where they have a group of internal leaders that are driving adoption of new products and new functionality that actually comes out, specifically 2010.
So TAP is Technology Adoption Program?
Correct. So, with that, a tool like Twitter that you choose to feed into SharePoint. For example, there's federated search or federated locations within SharePoint that comes with the infrastructure update that came just after the first service pack. That actually allows you to consume a service, an external service. For this concept, we'll talk about external services like Twitter or Facebook, anything that actually exposes information from its API via XML or RSS or something along those lines. And to that effect, you can maybe pull in. Let's say you set up a federated location for Twitter, and you're pulling in the search term, SharePoint 2010. And you have this dashboard running all day that is, being used by SharePoint's federated locations, federated search, to pull in specific information regarding new and upcoming technology that those folks need to know about all day. It can be anything. It could be Twitter. It could be Facebook. It could be TechNet news articles. It can be anything at that point. So, again, that's where the lines of what is social networking really gets blurred. It's really just what it really comes down to is the ease of the mass knowledge that's being spread between many, many different people.
Another good use that I heard recently, I was chatting with the Dell guys at their exhibition stand down in the main hall. And they were saying that Dell watches all of the major popular sites quite closely, looking for feedback. And, obviously, I think some of these companies look for the conversations that are going on around their product, and others actively encourage feedback, for product design and things like that by, setting up a Facebook group or watching specific Twitter tags.
Right. I actually have two really good examples, personal examples. One, most, like you said, most of these companies have a Twitter account, and they're following anything anyone says about their company. And in my preparation to actually come to South Africa, I wanted to get an expansion SD card for my GPS, so I can bring my GPS and come over. Well, I won't say the actual company's name, but their site was either down or inaccessible in that particular area for days, probably about a week. Finally, I Twittered it, and I said, hey, what's going on with, X GPS service? It's been down for days, weeks. And on top of the other folks that are tweeting the same thing about the website and trying to get the same information, I actually got responses back from the company itself why the site was down, when it was going to be back up. And then there's been many, many different examples of that. Another example is, there's folks who actually Twitter situations that they're in. I think there was a student either in Egypt or Iran who was arrested for whatever reason, and they Twittered, "I'm arrested in this country, call the embassy," or something like that. And just that quick little note went out to hundreds and hundreds of people that followed him. And the process of, finding out what had happened, figuring out, what could be done to help this person, kind of went down through the chain and actually got up to, it was a United States citizen So, went up through that chain of command and figured out what was actually going on. So there's tons and tons of examples online about how someone Twittered or Facebook comment or whatever, a situation that they were in or a problem they were having, and actually got responses back from the root of the actual issue. So
some food for thought on how these technologies can be used.
absolutely.
I heard in Twitter that, and I'm not a Twitter guy, that may be changing. A lot of people are now prodding me, so I may be signing up soon. Watch this space. But I heard that in Twitter you can have kind of private groups or like a company-specific area that people can tweet in.
That's a good question. I'm not sure. I know that there's something in Twitter called hashtags, and whenever there's an event or a specific circumstance that warrants a lot of people talking about it, people set up hashtags, and essentially what you're doing is you're tagging whatever information you're tweeting at that particular moment to that circumstance or event or whatever. So for TechEd South Africa, it's actually hashtag or # TEA09. And every time someone actually says something about TechEd South Africa, they put that hashtag in, and that gets funneled into anything anyone's searching on specific to that hashtag. Now, if it's particular groups, I'm not exactly sure. I don't think I've run across anything like that other than maybe like a Facebook group or something, but that could be. I mean, Twitter is something that's growing all the time, and I would love to see something like groups and something like I said before, conversational threading. That would be nice.
Okay, well, we'll have to see what the Twitter guys add. Okay, so now let's move back into a SharePoint context. If I've decided I want to enable some of these features in my organization, but I want to kind of keep people within the context of SharePoint, I either want to activate some of these features within SharePoint. I mean, turning a blog on is a case of just adding it. But maybe I want to bring some kind of Twitter feed, a company-specific Twitter feed that we're monitoring into the a web part or something like that. How would I bring that in? Maybe can you give us some ideas there?
Sure. So like I talked about before, there's SharePoint's federated search that got pushed out with the infrastructure update. That's one.
So that was July of 2008, I think, somewhere around there.
Yeah, that was about a year ago at this point. Yeah, it's been a while.
So those features are rolled into Service Pack 2.
Correct.
Let's be clear on that.
Correct, absolutely. And from what I understand, hopefully this doesn't break any... I can only imagine that they wouldn't take it out, but I can imagine this would be in 2010 as well. But it's like I said before, it's an area that will allow you to consume some kind of XML resource, whether it be RSS or whatever other type of OpenSearch compatible language that gets pulled in.
And OpenSearch is an actual standard. It's not,
Correct.
just kind of, it's uppercase.
Yeah, it's definitely standard.
So there's a specific standard for the information feed that will allow it to be searched in a certain way.
Exactly. So, one of those ways to do that would be, let's say for your specific example, you only want to pull in, let's say, just TechEd South Africa related information. You can set up a dashboard. You can actually utilize federated search web parts in other places than just search. So if you want to build a dashboard specific to, let's say, company news, or in this case, TechEd news, you can actually build that page out, throw that web part on the page, and in the back end, when you're setting up your federated location, you can drop in the URL that you want to be kind of put out there, or you can just build your own federated connector and then drop in the URL, which in this case would be twitter.com/search/ and then the search term. I'm not sure the exact protocol right in front of me, but something to that point. So you're always returning content based on the search term, in this example, TechEd.
In this case, you're hard coding the search term rather than like on the search page where it picks up
Correct.
content.
The alternative, like you said, is actually in federated. When you're building a federated location, squiggly brackets, search terms, all one word, will allow you to replace whatever parameter you're passing to the external service with the word you actually searched upon. So when you drop in that URL, and let's say instead of twitter.com/search TechEd, you put in that search term parameter. you can then pass to Twitter's API whatever someone searches on in SharePoint. So let's say I search on TechNet instead of TechEd. It'll go out to Twitter, pass that search term in there, pull back the results, and display them. So that's one way to get dynamic content from an external source. But like again, if you want to just do a dashboard style news posting or what's being said about the company at any particular time, you can always just stick the URL in there for whatever open search compatible language you're pulling from, or compatible service you're pulling from.
So that federated search is one way that we can bring stuff in from a specific news source. Can you maybe give us some other ideas?
Well, so there's other ways to pull in things like Twitter feeds. There's actually a couple web parts out there now that will allow you to do things a little bit easier than a federated location, if that's even possible, because setting up a federated location is actually very quick and very easy, as I actually demoed today in my session. But there's actually a large push for content to be driven the same way those external services are being used. So Twitter style conversation threads in SharePoint, or LinkedIn style postings in SharePoint. So it's external of those that connection to those sites, but it still has that same functionality, so it can be used internal to the corporation. One thing that's been heavily talked about in some of the clients that I've been involved with was a Facebook style application running inside of SharePoint. And a lot of people would say, well, that's My Sites. Well, in 2007, in my opinion, My Sites was still pretty infant. I know a lot of that hopefully will change. So coming up to 2010, I think that Facebook and those types of external sources and external mediums are going to be a lot more fluid, both in integration of those same systems into SharePoint and with providing that same service internal of the company, if that makes sense.
If I think back over the previous episodes, we haven't really unpacked the existing concept of what My Sites is in 2007. Can you dive in there and maybe take us through what My Sites is as it stands right now, even potentially outside of the social networking context? Although I think it's obviously got a large impact there.
So yeah, there's a lot of different ways to use My Sites. From the technical side of things, My Sites are just site collections. There's many site collections. Each site collection is a user. There's a lot of talk and a lot of theory about the best way to use My Sites, the best way to back up My Sites, and maintain and migrate proprietary information that was specific to a user that may or may not be there anymore. Some of the ways that it's utilized specifically is kind of a dashboard task tracker. So if you have a lot of workflow enabled lists in SharePoint, those tasks, whether it be something that needs approval or any part of the life cycle of that workflow, can get actually posted directly into one's My Site. Now, a lot of how a My Site is used is driven by how the IT department or the implementer of SharePoint deems it to be used and how they want it to be used. It can be very minimalistic. It can just have the user's photo, their manager, those types of things, or it can be this full-blown picture uploading and social media extravaganza where people are finding new colleagues within a large organization, finding what types of information have been talked about and published internal of the organization that can be utilized in other projects. There's many different things that can be used. And then again, some of the driving ambitions to utilize the same type of functionality available in some of these social media services internal of the actual My Site itself. So it never actually leaves, but someone can do something like Facebook, leaving comments on someone's My Site, or something along those lines.
So it can, from what I've seen, it can be used to contain a lot of useful information, but within a reasonably boxed context, while at the same time encouraging a lot of user adoption as well. Because I think a lot of users in general with systems, one of the reasons that adoption can be slowed down, or that people can struggle with adoption, is just the fear that users have. Sometimes my sites can help with that, because you can explain to the user that this is purely their own stuff. They can't break anybody else's thing by getting to know SharePoint a little bit, creating some lists, things like that. So that's where it can be used. And to some extent, it's sad that a lot of companies just see that it's worth turning off. But the flip side is that the content can grow out of control there. Really.
Sure, absolutely. There has to be a lot of governance that's taken into consideration when setting up my sites, how you want them to grow, how you want them to be contained, where you want the information to go if the user can't access that information anymore. Again, like if they've moved on to bigger and better. How do you get something out of someone's My Site that had a very crucial role in the company, whether it be financial information or proprietary information? Those types of things need to be migrated and archived. They might be fairly important. So that's something else to take into consideration as well.
Okay, so that was a bit of a detour in some ways, slightly off topic. Shall we get back to the social networking stuff?
Sure.
A lot of the things we've spoken about are how to bring external sources into SharePoint. Have you got any ideas how somebody may want to incorporate the ability to create content out into a Facebook, for example? An idea that strikes me is maybe, LinkedIn's often used for the recommendations, the ability to recommend somebody else. One might want to be able to recommend a colleague at the company directly from within a dashboard in SharePoint, or from within a web part in SharePoint, for example.
Sure.
Have you seen anything like that? Or
you can utilize a bit of the My Colleagues part of things in the My Sites as well. There's the web part My Colleagues actually will combine folks that you interact with, that you converse with, whether it be through live communication server or just folks that you have some sort of tie with, whether it be content or anything along those lines. There's also ways to, whether it be through content types or some kind of tagging, some kind of metadata associated with content, can actually roll back who is associated with what, and kind of almost like suggesting a friend in something like Facebook. You can possibly set up something like suggest a colleague interaction with someone who's already come up with content that you might have to use, or have like jobs in the actual organization, but might be in physical different locations. That's one way. Actually pushing back to something like Twitter or Facebook, we get into the realm of custom dev at that point. But the good thing is there's tons of useful services that are being created all the time for things like Facebook and Twitter, or whatever. I think those are the two mainly utilized services that have the most predominant API that you can actually hit against. So coming up with something that could push back to Twitter, push back to Facebook, utilizing their own API would be fairly simple, and to that effect, I'm not sure if it hasn't already been done. I just haven't come across it at this point. But
I think we have to leave the conference and go and start this business.
Yeah, exactly.
Selling Facebook web parts.
Yeah.
Okay, Eric, I think we've discussed some interesting stuff. So thanks for that discussion. Do you maybe want to close up by giving the listeners some information on where they can find you, where your blog is, where you'll be speaking at upcoming conferences?
Sure. So you can find me, my blog, at www.ericharlan.com. Some of the upcoming conferences and sessions that I'll be giving. There is the 3 or 4 other sessions I actually have at TechEd, which by the time this actually gets published will probably be a little bit too late. But I know a lot of those are being recorded. There is TechEd online conversation with Joel Olson and myself about situations related around Twitter and Facebook and social networking, so that might be a good related content piece that someone might want to check out. Back in the States, if you're checking this out, you can find me at the Virginia Beach SharePoint Users Group. I'll be there in October talking about some different things. And then there's always the Baltimore SharePoint Users Group, which you can always find me there. And I'm pretty sure I'll be in Europe in 2 weeks. There's SharePoint Saturday Copenhagen, which I might end up stopping at. I'm not exactly 100% sure at this point. But there's there's always something, always somewhere, and all those things are on my blog, so you can find them there.
Okay, great. And enjoy the rest of your time here in South Africa.
Oh yeah, we're going shark diving in Cape Town. I can't wait for that. So that's gonna be fun.
Yeah, that should be interesting. I'll look forward to the pictures on your blog.
Hopefully, all in one piece.
A four-limbed Eric Harlan will be making his way back to the United States. Eric, thanks again. It's been great.
No worries. Thanks.
Out the window, everybody keep on fading out. Gone out the window, everybody keep on fading out.
If you've got any questions about any of the ideas discussed in this episode, or you'd like to give other feedback, like show topics or requests, then mail us at feedback@TheMossShow.com. To access the archives of all of our shows, browse to www.themosshow.com or www.TheMossShow.com.